Hey everybody, Brett from AstartesGaming here, back with another Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord developer blog video. Today we're checking out the blog from April 5th, 2018, which is titled Map Design and Castles. So it looks like we're finally getting a little bit more information about the overland map in single player. So I am really looking forward to diving into this one because this is something I have been wanting to hear more about. I'd still like to hear about like the fiefs in general and how that system works, but it looks like they're going to focus on individual parts of that as we go, which is fine because that should mean that we get a little bit more depth on each piece rather than just one broad overview. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. Greetings, warriors of Calradia. Castles are perhaps one of the most iconic images that come to mind when people think of the medieval era. These large and seemingly impregnable structures dominate the landscape in which they stood and projected an image of power and authority that aimed to impress both the lord's subjects and peers. In last week's blog, we looked at some of the tools of warfare that were used to overcome the defenses of these magnificent medieval behemoths, and talked about the different ways that players can approach sieges in Bannerlord. In this week's blog, we would like to discuss the thought process that goes into designing castles for the game, from the historical influences we use through to the gameplay related decisions we make, and show you how this all comes together to make a castle for the game. Alright, so historical influences. In our faction overview blogs, we talked about the cultures and people that influenced the design of each of the factions of Calradia, and how this provided us with a solid base to build on and create our own take on this period of history. Using real-world cultures in this way gives us the advantage of having a wealth of historical sources and knowledge to take inspiration from, and allows us to cherry-pick the parts which we find interesting and exciting to include in the game. This kind of readily available information is extremely useful when it comes to designing architecture for the game, and in particular castles. There really isn't much room for experimentation or running wild with your imagination when your life is on the line, and poorly designed or unnecessary features could end up costing you a lot more than just gold in your chest. So for most of our factions, this process is quite straightforward. After all, there are many medieval castles that are still standing and in use to this day. However, when it comes to a faction like Britannia, which draws its inspiration from the native tribes of the British Isles, things start to get a little bit more complicated. Yeah, because you chose them from a completely different time period. I address this in, well, basically every time it comes up, but I'll say it here as well just because it's relevant to this, and if you haven't seen those videos, I'd like for this to still make sense to you. So most of the factions in Bannerlord draw their inspiration from somewhere around 1000 AD, give or take, 100 years or so. That's sort of the range that they're pulling their inspiration from, except with the Britannians, who are very much Celtic, and even a little bit Thracian or Dacian. So yeah, you're taking like a faction that was a bit primitive in like the classical era, and you're kind of shoehorning them into a much, or at least grouping them with factions from a much later period. So it would make sense that, yeah, they don't really have the, castles and stuff to draw from because they didn't have castles. They had probably like earthen defense works and things like that, maybe wooden fortifications, but certainly not like big stone castles. Maybe the Romans had stuff like that, not necessarily that, but stuff like it, but certainly not the Celts. Anyways, the British Isles were subject to many waves of invaders and settlers over the years, each bringing their own advancements in architecture and warfare with them. The arrival of these various cultures, with their different building methods, slowly superseded the traditional earthwork and wooden defensive structures of the Celts and the Picts. This presented us with a choice. Do we closely follow the design of the original structures, or do we take inspiration from the designs which followed? In the end, we decided to make use of the beautiful, extensive hill forts and massive earthwork ramparts of Iron Age Britain, while trying to stay away from the Norman influence on castle building, which we use for Valandia, who are based on the Normans. We include features like multiple rows of ditches and earthwork defenses while trying to keep the circular forms of the original earthwork with each upgrade level of the castle. I like that decision. I think it will be very interesting to compare their fortifications and just overall architecture with the other factions. I think that could, again, make them a very interesting faction to play. A lot of the decisions they made with that faction make them seem like they will be interesting to play, but part of that is because they seem like an overwhelming underdog that would offer a real challenge for anybody trying to, bring them into the limelight. But it would be really cool to, fight and defend sieges in those types of fortifications, because we've fought siege battles in castles. Granted, not in the way that Bannerlord will allow us to, but we've seen plenty of castles, whether it be in Warband or other games, but you don't see a lot of earthworks and stuff. So it'll be cool to explore those. This thought process carries over to all of our factions. We try to stay true to the original designs to make each castle believable enough as to not break the immersion of the player, but still leave enough room for us to inject some of our own ideas and style into each castle. So here they're going to talk about the upgrade system. There are different levels of castle because, again, each fief is essentially a village that you're adding upgrades onto. And so you're sort of building around the central point, and walls are one of the things that you can add as an upgrade to that. And there are different levels of walls, which will take your village to like a small castle town to, larger and larger ones. So hopefully you guys can see that. Let me scroll up a little bit. The upgrade system. The castle upgrade system of Bannerlord allows us to have greater variety in our castle designs. Apart from the additional depth to the campaign that this system brings, we try to use it to create different experiences for the player when attacking or defending a castle. By the way, I should have mentioned this like a couple seconds ago before we jumped into this paragraph, but I really like what they're doing with that upgrade system, not necessarily just in terms of the castles and stuff, but in terms of the fiefs in general, because what this allows you to do is, like, if you're playing Warband, for example, and you join a faction, you get a basic fief. It's usually the worst one they have. So, like, whatever was just razed to the ground, or, like a border village that is getting raided constantly. So you generally get that, and you have it for a while, and then you conquer castles, and you kind of abandon that village and just keep moving up and up until you have towns and you're making a bunch of money, and you don't want villages because they're just one more thing you have to worry about defending. With the system they have in Bannerlord, that completely changes things, because you can be given a small little fief somewhere, and rather than moving on, conquering bigger things and forgetting about it, you can focus all of your efforts on building that up into the powerful fortress that you want, or the rich town that you want. And I really like that potential, because it adds, what's the word? I don't know. A little bit of like sentimentality to them. Like, this is my first fief, and look how far it's come, type of thing. Look how much we built it up. So I think that's really cool. Anyways, the system is quite simple. Castles start at level 1 and can be upgraded twice to reach their maximum level. So level 2, level 3. 3 tiers. In the example castle below, with each upgrade the castle gets taller, more dominant towers, better positions to deploy defensive machines, deeper walls at critical points for larger troop formations, greater coverage over its gatehouse, and the opportunity to deploy a layered defense. Alright, so let's watch this. This is them just kind of laying out the walls and building it, and then we'll get to see what level 1 looks like. So that's level 1, more or less. And then here we see level 2, things getting pushed out a little bit further. More towers, especially near the entrance. And then here we see it expanding further and having sort of like a, I never know what to call it in medieval terms, but it would be like sort of like an airlock type thing in front of the gatehouse. So basically a double layered gatehouse that they would have to push through. But yeah, so they get better and better in terms of defense, which is really cool. While it may be acceptable or even preferable in some instances To assault the gatehouse of a level 1 castle with just a battering ram. As the castle is upgraded, this kind of simplistic approach becomes less viable, and by level 3 you will need a well-coordinated attack to be able to breach the defenses, just as it should be. However, that being said, this might not necessarily be the case in every instance. A castle placed on a hilltop or on a plain might grow stronger in more than one way with each upgrade, while one that incorporates some of natural defense, that's not written properly, such as a lake, won't have the room to expand and will only receive the benefit of taller towers and walls with each upgrade. But natural defenses are pretty potent as well. Having, like mountains or something that protect one side of your castle, or a large lake that essentially makes assault from that side unviable, that can be just as good, if not better, than extra walls at times. Anyways, in terms of gameplay, as far as playing styles go, Mount & Blade games offer players a number of different ways to approach battles. In sieges, we can simplify this a little and look at it as two main styles: commanding your army to its maximum potential from the rear, or fighting on the front lines and creating opportunities for your troops to exploit. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty fair assessment. I always go for the former and end up doing the latter, no matter how hard I try. I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. But I always try to take the approach of a commander that holds back, but ultimately I can't always prevent myself from just charging in and joining the scrum, because it's a lot of fun to just get in there and fight. But obviously, in terms of effectiveness, I think being the commander is a little bit better, unless you're just such an overwhelming warrior, which it's possible to turn your character into in Warband, that you're basically the hammer that just crushes the enemy and your guys just follow you and clean up the mess. And that's definitely a viable tactic if you can level your character up and get the right equipment and you're proficient enough in combat. But I think that is kind of more of an exception, and the rule is that commanding your troops effectively and worrying less about fighting generally leads to better outcomes in battles, but not always. So let's see. In Bannerlord, we want players to be able to experiment and choose their own way to approach sieges, and this is something that we take into consideration when designing castles. No matter how large or complex our castles are, we always try to give commanding positions for both the attackers and defenders. A small hill near your siege camp, or the tallest tower in your castle, might not be the best position to utilize your character's combat potential, but it would give you a great vantage point to oversee the battle from and make it easier to command your troops. Meanwhile, shortcuts between battlements and multiple choke points built into the map give you the opportunity to move where you are needed and hold back an attack or break through a defense. Cool. And here we get to see, is that the same castle? It's hard to tell from that angle, but obviously it looks much better because this is being, rendered in engine. Well, this is in engine as well, but this is more of like a dev tool, like an editor or something. So obviously it's not going to have all the lighting effects and stuff. Although you can see they're looking at like FPS up here. You won't be able to read that in YouTube probably, but it says bottleneck CPU, and then it's showing the percent idle of the CPU, just to see like how much CPU power it's taking up as they're doing this. And so that's the end of it. So that's pretty cool. I like just about everything I heard from that. This is, again, what I was hoping we would get from sieges and castles and whatnot. My only hope is that they're not too easy to take. I'd like for it to be a real commitment when you decide to take a castle. And I would like castles to be a real asset in the campaign, because in Warband they don't always feel that way. A lot of times they feel almost like burdens. Like if you take something, it's like, great, now I have to defend it. And unless you have a huge number of troops garrisoning it, it's almost better to just let it get taken and take it back later. I've done that at times just because I know that there was no way I was going to defend something, or it just wasn't worth the commitment. I was going to lose too many men in the defense, so I was better off letting the 1,000 or so troops that a campaign from another faction brought to just, take it, and then as soon as they leave, I just take it right back. So I'd like to see less of that in Bannerlord. I hope that, again, this is like a real commitment when you decide to try to take a castle, especially one upgraded to like tier 3. Maybe not so much a tier 1, but if you're going to decide to assault this thing, it better be one hell of a battle. And again, I like the ability to, upgrade, invest in your properties rather than just, moving on to better ones. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with all this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you like this system? Are there things you think they missed? Or things that you really, really like about it? But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I had a great time talking about some Bannerlord with you, and I look forward to seeing you guys back here for the next developer blog.